Hello and welcome to Raw Chatter. It is your host here, Vicky Midwood, and I have got an amazing coach who is going to tell us a little bit about their story and why they got to be doing what they are doing. Ashley Griffiths is somebody that I met through networking, and we had a fantastic conversation and realized that there is an awful lot going on behind the mask of the video coach. So, Ashley, welcome and thank you for joining me. Please help our listeners to know a little bit more about you, your story, what got you here, and the masks that you were hiding behind.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for having me, Vicky. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And you've got me pre-coffee. I realized I didn't have any coffee in the house this morning.
Oh, no.
Bit of an oversight. Yeah. Quite the morning. Quite the morning. So yes, so the video coach, how did this happen? I hear you say
Yeah,
by accident,
right.
by
Best
complete
things usually
accident.
do.
Um, I have a background in education and hospitality management. So before the lockdown, pandemics, all that jazz, I was still in education. I was working predominantly with kids that had slipped through the net in education.
Right.
People were learning behavioral challenges, and their parents approached me and said, right, they need to pass their exams. And I'm like, okay, well, that might what's going on. I was more interested in the person than the exam because I
Right.
figured, as with all things, when you focus in on the person, you get to learn what the intention is behind their behaviors, what their belief systems are. And from there, you can start rewriting narratives and you're in a better place to do whatever else needs to be doing. So certainly with the kids, they didn't have any belief in themselves.
Can I just ask what sort of age kids are we talking about, Ashley?
Teenagers.
Right. Cool.
Teenagers. So yeah, I mean, my sweet spot in education had always been teenage to the um,
Right.
adult demographics. So I was doing that. Then lockdown happened. So I was predominantly face to face. Before that, I would just travel around the local area, help people out, and then yeah, work doing insane amount of travel now that I look back at it.
What is your local area, Ashley?
I'm in Leamington Spa in the Midlands, so I
Right.
travel around literally Warwickshire and up into Coventry, was as
Oh,
far
wow.
as I
Quite a
went.
distance then. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I organised it, but it was quite exhausting. So by the time I
Mhm.
got to this time of the year, I was like, I don't want to talk to anyone until September. So
Can
off I would
imagine.
go. Um, so yes, so I am used to being in front of people. Um,
Mm.
I'm an ambivert by nature, so my extroverted side absolutely adores entertaining. I've always loved being in front of large groups of students, emceeing, organizing events. So when the pandemic hit, I'm just sat at home thinking, what do I do now? And I'm talking to myself and I'm getting bored out of my mind.
As
So,
many people did.
absolutely. So I just sat here, one day talking to Casper, going, "You're not very talkative, are you, Casper?" And
Who's
Casper, obviously,
Casper?
friendly ghost.
All right. Just to make sure that I am on the right lines before I jump in with like, is that a dog? Is it a pet? Is it an ornament?
No, it's Casper the Friendly Ghost. It was. I always use characters in my teaching and in
Cool.
and in my videos now. I've always had that flair for the dramatic.
Nice.
So when I was in education, if people weren't answering and I thought, right, I need to diffuse the energy here, I just have a little chat with Casper and then it bring the stress level down.
Brilliant.
um
Love it.
so I was here just having a chat and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to record a video. I need to talk to somebody. I need to get my message out. I need to be inspiring or motivating or giving people encouragement on some level.
Yeah.
So I recorded a video. And this video was a 9-minute epic of ahs, and so much waffle. I tell you, there was more waffle on that video than a buffet table. It was nuts. It was, it was, yeah, it was an epic. And unsurprisingly, virtually no one watched it.
Mm.
But this is the thing, I enjoyed it. I
Right.
enjoyed the process, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to record another one.
Brilliant.
And then I committed to started to recording videos every Friday. Just
Right.
talking, just going off the cuff, pretty much like what I still do now. Actually, it's just now I've got a bit more flair with it. So
Not
I
so
just go
many
off the
ums
cuff.
and ahs.
No, most definitely not. Maybe when I'm doing the podcast a bit, when I'm caught in the thinking mode, but
Yeah.
generally when I get into the zone, it's like boom, done. Um, and yes, so I literally just started recording videos, and I did it every Friday. And people started saying, and it started getting some traction. People started watching them, enjoying them, commenting them, got really good engagement on them. And then people started saying, Ashley, love your energy on camera. You're such a natural. And then there would be a but. And I'm like, well, what's the but? And it's like, yeah, but I'd never be able to do it myself.
Right.
And I was like, for me, just from my background in management and education, the moment I hear I can't, I'll never, that's it. It's like a red flag to a bull.
Right.
So I literally was like, there's an idea here, there's a business here, and it very much is aligned with every step of my journey,
Yeah.
in both on a personal level and a professional journey in terms of the people that I've worked with. So I thought, you know what, why not? Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. So I started imparting wisdom on videos as I was learning on the job.
Fantastic. Best way to learn, isn't it? To just do it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I did a post yesterday on LinkedIn just about that, because I think there's this obsession online with magic bullets about these systems that will get you results yesterday. And
Tell me
that
about
the
it.
world doesn't work like that. It
No.
just doesn't. You know, even the overnight successes we have thrust upon us in the world, they did not happen overnight. They
10
reached a
years in the making, most of
tipping
them.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a tipping point when they were in maybe the public sphere that nudged them over to that. So there was the perception it
Yeah.
was, and some people play up to it, you know, like, and I think that's where sometimes people get a little bit lost with law of attraction and stuff like that. They like, well, yeah, I thought it, and then it happened the next day. It was like,
Mm.
yes, but what happened before that? What brought you to that moment? And
Yeah.
that was, for me, is the sweet spot in terms of creating content, in terms of people talking about their stories, focusing on the nuance, focusing on what got you to that point. And it's something that I really, really encourage people to really lean into by sharing their stories, because the thing is, online, you are surrounded by highlight reels. It's very, very superficial,
Very
because
much so.
people, there's this notion of what you should show and what you shouldn't
Yeah.
show. And I've been in lots of debates with this. You know, certainly on the mental health field, I remember I saw a poll or something years ago on LinkedIn about, if you knew somebody had a mental health problem, would you work with that business?
Right. And what
And
what what did the poll tell us?
some people were honest, some people weren't.
Right.
Some people like flew the flag, some people were very brutally honest about it. And
Mm.
I thought it was important to have that nuance. Some people literally were like, no, I probably wouldn't.
Mm.
And those that actually kind of mapped out the reasons why were easier to engage with.
Makes
You know,
sense.
it's like it kind of makes sense, because ultimately they wanted to protect their business. But again, I felt it was far too nuanced, because the thing, mental health, is it's kind of an umbrella term.
Well, it absolutely is, and I think for you, this is the opportunity for me to ask you about your story, because
Yep.
what you enable people to do and the way that you coach them is that you can hear what they're not saying, so that
Yeah.
you can bring out the best in them and their story, that it's going to resonate with people. And the reason that you can do that is because you've got quite a story. yourself. So
Yeah.
do you want to let people know a little bit more about your story and just where it led you to, and the masks that you found that you were wearing along the way?
The masks I was wearing, I suppose to start with that, it would be kind of fun, almost funny to share a story
Go for
because
it.
I didn't really see it at the time. But now that I'm a few years down the journey, I'm like, there was a hell of a lot of truth in that. And I was at uni, I was working in a pub, and one of the door staff said to me the one day, "You're like Wurzel Gummidge." So for anyone who's not familiar with that, that's a old TV show here in the UK of a scarecrow, that you had multiple heads, and he would literally put on the head depending on his mood
Yeah,
and what he needed
loved
to
it.
do on that day. So this doorman said I was like that just because my moods would keep shifting. There'd be
Right.
times where I would be super like lively. There'd be times when I'd be melancholic. There would be times when I'd be like quite quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the way I am. I can't, as much as I love being around people, there are times where I just can't.
Yeah.
That's the way I
And I
am.
think many people listening will resonate with that. I think there's this idea that we should always, and we know the importance of community, but also we can't be kind of switched on and wanting to be with people all of the time. We need to
Ah,
recharge and reset, and just recognizing and hearing somebody else say, we need it, and you can't do it, I can't do it either. If I have a day where I'm talking to people back to back, the next day I don't want to speak to anybody. And that's just how I am, and I'm cool with that because I know myself as you are. But for people listening, I think they just need to hear it's normal. There's nothing wrong with you,
yeah,
and it's okay.
I
Yeah,
think for me, somebody said to me the other week, it was about charging. It's about recharging.
yeah,
Those moments are about recharging so that you're ready to go when you need to be around people.
absolutely. Yeah,
And that really resonated. But the coming back to that story about the heads, I
Dorman.
think is yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it was so very true because it was a form of a mask.
yeah.
So for
Mm,
me, in terms of my mental health journey, I've as long as I remember, I had some form of depression or melancholy. For sure,
right,
as long as I remember, as a kid, I I struggled to fit in. I struggled with emotions and just really struggled with how to articulate myself. So I isolated myself from a very young age. I wanted to be involved with people, but I didn't know how.
right,
And every time I did get involved, I perceived, I just perceived lots of rejection. So I would really, really struggle with people and being around people. So I started isolating myself at quite a young age.
right.
And I
When you say
remember,
quite a young age, are we talking about sort of, school age, or
yeah,
even younger than
absolutely.
that?
We're
Yeah.
talking, we're talking primary school.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Okay, so very young. Yeah.
it started very young, and this only essentially it got more when I got to secondary school.
Mm,
But I don't think back then I wore a mask in the sense that at home I would, yeah, I'm happy, I'm good because I would do that. But I remember at school I was not. I'd walk around, I'd just do laps by myself, just miserable. I just remember
right.
feeling miserable. And I remember my nickname at school was Grandad. Because I had a little bit of a world weary charm, and my teachers wrote it in my reports. I found my old school reports the other week, and now that I know a lot about the mind, how we our self-image, our self-awareness, that was kind of not cool.
No.
Um,
Mm,
it was always, as I remember, it was always quite light-hearted from the teacher front, but it was like
right.
and in the later days of school, there was an intervention, in all fairness.
Okay. Right.
They
So people
noticed
recognised.
there were 2 teachers that recognized there's something not right with this. There's
Right.
something not right. And in all fairness, they were really, really supportive, and they were really kind. So, yeah, I mean, that built up to 18 where I had my first breakdown. Um, And
So just to help people who are listening, who might have hear the term breakdown, but don't really understand what that actually means, can
yeah,
you kind of explain what happened for you, how it felt, what did you do, not do, what was going on?
I just exploded. I
Right,
exploded because quite literally in a fit of rage
right,
of it all came out because the thing is, and I haven't really said this, I didn't really know how to articulate verbally how I felt. I didn't feel comfortable being able to
right,
do that. I didn't feel safe to do that. And any time that I did, I perceived whether this was true or not, but I perceived that people didn't really accept that. So I felt like every time I made myself vulnerable, people would pull away.
right,
So I just didn't. And then I got to 18 and it was around that time I started, well, it was, yeah, a bit younger than that, but I started drinking quite heavily. And I
right.
liked the fact that initially it made me confident. It made me confident to talk to people. It made me a little less socially awkward.
Yeah,
Um, because I was very shy. I was
familiar
extremely
story.
shy,
Yeah,
very, very shy. And so I started drinking heavily and this binge drinking, it was all good fun until it wasn't.
right.
There would be
Yeah,
a point where I would switch, and
right,
that's when I would get aggressive, I would get violent,
right.
um, and I'd get emotional. So it
A
was
real
on one of
roller
these
coaster then.
huge,
Yeah.
huge. It was like unleashing the beast almost.
No. Wow.
Um, and and luckily, nothing ever really truly bad came of it, but I literally exploded one day, and it was just this huge outburst at the world. I mean, I literally, yeah, I came home from the pub one day and just literally I can't even remember what happened. It was nothing. It wasn't even something triggered me. It wasn't even, I think I put my feet up on the sofa and my dad said, "Get your feet off the sofa." And
Right.
I just snapped.
Wow.
And the next day I kind of got frog marched uh to the doctors.
Right.
Um and I just remember feeling so defeated,
Right.
so low, so helpless, so numb.
And did you
And
find that the doctor was sympathetic, was able to listen, was helpful?
they were, but I think this is the thing, like, I've only just really discovered this right now. Now, again, from my experience, I was immediately put on antidepressants.
Right. Right.
Now, the issue wasn't the yeah, maybe there was that, but with the information they had, that was what they thought
Right.
needed to happen. Like, with what
Right.
I know now, I needed it was more than that. It was much more on a
So much.
spiritual, on an
Yeah.
energetic level.
Yeah.
There was trauma coming to the surface, and those pills didn't help. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in all fairness, they did put me in touch with my first ever counselor
Okay. That's
who
good.
did help me to start exploring things. But to be honest with you, up until, because I didn't really know how to do it,
Yeah.
up until probably my 30s, and I was in and out of counseling
Mm.
throughout that time. It wasn't until my 30s I properly engaged, because I would deflect, I would make it all intellectual.
Right. Yes, I'm
Um,
smiling at you. That's such a familiar story. I just want to go back a little bit to that because were you just like you went to the doctors and they gave you medication? Was there any talk about you being hospitalized or
no.
any kind of that sort of stuff? So you were kind of you had this breakdown, and I'm guessing from that point on you were regularly seen and your medication was monitored, and yeah, so that kind of became the norm for you.
Yeah, yeah. So I was in counseling, and then they'd check with the tablets, and I can't remember
Right,
when I stopped taking them. I did stop taking them certainly before I went to university.
right,
And then I was back on them again when I went to university, and then I was off them again, and so I was on and off medication until I was 22, and I remember the day. where I literally I threw them in the bin. I literally threw them in the bin. I was sat in Salzburg.
Right.
I was sat in this tent in this middle of this valley and sat just outside of Salzburg in Austria. And it was so green and it was so lush, and I was crying my eyes out. And I just looked around and I took my feet out my shoes and I just put them on the grass. And I just sat there. And that was my first real true experience of probably what you would call mindfulness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't have a clue what that was at that time. I wasn't remotely spiritual. Thought it was all a bunch of mumbo jumbo at that age.
As many do when you're younger. Yeah.
You know, and so I remember just putting my feet on the ground and just looking around and just was like, this, what is there to be sad about here?
So it really was an awakening.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I was going to take you back slightly
You sure?
because how did you manage? Because were you still drinking when you were on the antidepressants, and how did you
Oh, yeah.
manage that whole through university and the pressure to get your degree and the whole social aspect of that?
I
Because
was
that's a minefield for so many young people and for parents now.
oh, for me, the social aspect, that was a huge part. I mean, I loved that. To be honest with you, the drinking, it wasn't until I got into my late 30s that my relationship with alcohol changed.
Right. So
So I
you were
still
still
drank.
drinking through
Oh,
uni and
huge.
taking your antidepressants. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, I'm just going to keep drinking
Cool.
because I liked what was possible.
Right.
I liked until I got to the point where I'd be really blind drunk. I liked who I was.
Right. So you
I liked
liked the more kind of inebriated version of Ashley.
I liked the confidence. I liked the willingness to just play, to be myself, to laugh, to joke, because I didn't feel confident doing that around people unless I really knew them.
Right. Right.
I was happy to blend into the shadows.
Which is what you were well practiced at doing because you'd done it since you were a little kid. So
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense. So what took you, because I'm intrigued, how did you end up in Salzburg in Austria in a tent?
Okay. So so well, that was a complete accident. That was actually, I can thank the alcohol for that actually.
Right.
Um because I was on, but that summer I traveled around Europe. I just did my first backpacking trip.
Nice.
And so I was in Vienna and I didn't really like Vienna at the time. Um and I'd just been partying while I was in Vienna. I liked the parties. I didn't really like the city that much. Just
Fair
there was
enough.
something about the vibe that didn't sit right with me. And I was traveling down. I think I was meant to go to Venice that day on the coach, but I was just too rough. So
Right.
I was like, right, I'm getting off. So that's how I ended up in Salzburg. So that was an example of when it actually worked in my favor.
Right. So I love these kind of stories because I immediately go to that's the universe stepping in to
Yeah.
just steer you to doing what you didn't know you needed to do.
Yeah, I needed a timeout because I know
Yeah.
it was quite funny. I remember I was rooming with this lady from Canada, and it was so funny. Everyone thought we were married. We'd never met. We literally got thrown in this big kind of like tent together. And it's like, right, you two, you're in it. We're like, we never met
Okay.
before. Ain't got a clue. We're like, well, it is what it is. It's cheaper if we sleep together. You know, we're in the same
Yeah.
room, whatever. We asked each other, you ain't got any axes or daggers or knives or anything. No, no, no. Right, we're good. And she wanted a bit. We both wanted a bit of time out because we partied a bit too hard. So
Right.
and then we ended up traveling together for ages. Just everyone, like I said, everybody thought we were married, so we kind of took advantage of that because
Cool.
it meant cheaper accommodation as we went. So
Yes.
we were like, that works.
Yeah.
We
Cool.
could be married if that works for you and that works for the price. No problem. We'll go for that.
Love it.
So yeah, it's like basically the whole trip though, it was kind of a find myself. I've always had a wanderlust. I've always been fascinated with the world. as long as I remember. Um, and I, I read a book when I was at school called Walkabout,
Yes, I read that. Yeah.
which had a real, has always had, it, it has always, it had a fundamental impact on me because I love that notion of just going out and finding yourself, removing yourself from whatever reality is around you at that moment, and literally just pressing the reset button. And I've subsequently done that numerous times in my life, sometimes in a bit of a rush, sometimes in a very positive way, sometimes in a not so positive way.
Right.
Um, well, when I say positive, not truly being aware of the cause and effect of that decision. Um, but I mean, just
We're talking
last
about
week,
retreats and stuff and that sort of thing.
retreats, removing myself from the business, just
Right.
going and getting offline,
Mm,
just being.
right.
Just that's what I have to do today. My responsibility to myself today is get up, do whatever I'm gonna do, and then go to sleep, and then do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, and ultimately that's kind of what life is really, but we like to overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
So yes, so I literally was just traveling around. So I went and found myself, and it was that trip that I truly started seeing that I didn't need alcohol. That
Amazing.
there was actually, I'd be sat, we'd be cooking, we'd be preparing, we'd be having a laugh and a joke on the coach when we were going in between cities. And I was like, for me though, you know, I realized there's no, I've got a blank slate here, and I might never see any of these people again. So for me, the risk of being was significantly less.
I love that because I think that's such a powerful point to come across. When you're with people and you're in an environment that you know them and they think that they know you, it's very hard for you to actually be who you truly are or to discover anything because we do
Yeah,
fall into patterns of behavior, don't we? And
massively.
just having the experience to go away and be with, as you said, a group of people that you probably won't see ever again gave you that opportunity to just discover who is Ashley and how do I be me. Brilliant.
It
Love
really
it.
did. I think, and just having different conversations with people, it really started opening my mind. And
Mm,
also, and I'd always had a kind of a kind, giving sort of nature, but I was always reluctant to share that because, as I mentioned this, every time I would give, I perceived that people just, oh, you've got what you needed, now you've gone.
right. Rejection.
Yeah. So there
Mm,
was a huge sense of rejection. So it's kind of no real surprise really that I do the job that I do now, because that's a big, big, big part of promoting your business.
absolutely.
And and so yeah, I started to really appreciate, see certain things about myself that I didn't know. And there was more
Amazing.
space for that. And I slowly but surely started letting that come out. It was slow, very slow, because when I got back to England, I just reverted to type.
I was just going to say because you threw your antidepressants away, and I'm guessing while you were on the trip, you felt fine because you were in an environment where you could just do whatever and be, and there was nobody monitoring you, and there was no pressure. But then coming back, kind of back to the old environment. Environment is just so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did you feel? Was it a sense of doom as soon as you landed back in the UK, or did your symptoms creep back up on you? Tell us about what that was like.
Okay, well, that trip changed everything for me in so many ways. It also accentuated some of the stuff that I had felt before I went,
Right,
especially not feeling part of the community. I was like, once I traveled and saw what was possible and saw different cultures, different vibe, when I came back to this island, I was like, I'm gone.
right.
I'm done. And And that mentality has followed me around ultimately all my life since. It the whole concept for me of I am going to get married, get the job, get the career, get the mortgage, all of that stuff, that just became irrelevant to me
Yeah.
from that moment. And in answer to your question, came back in the summer, didn't really revert to type straight away because it was
Right.
fun. I was confident. I was walking around. It was brilliant. When I first came back, I was just walking around talking to strangers.
Right. Love it.
And us Brits were not good at that. So there was a lot of like, "Who's this weirdo?" sort of vibe going on. Some people loved it, you know. In fact, I just went to the pub and stuff and just started talking to people. They were like, "Oh, brilliant."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, within once I was down to uni, the fact that I felt like I didn't really belong, it kind of burst the bubble at uni a bit.
Right.
And so the final year was quite a strange one.
Yeah. And you were doing a degree in.
Business studies.
Right. So I'm guessing that obviously it's helped you with your own business, even though was that something that you went straight into? Because obviously you said you didn't want to do the whole get into a career and a job and all the marriage malarkey. So after uni, what was your path?
Okay, after uni, I couldn't get a job.
Right. Well,
I wanted to move into HR. I really wanted to work with HR. I wanted to work with people because this is I guess I didn't really know it right then, but I was always interested in motivation. I was
mm,
always interested in the stories that people tell themselves. And certainly on a personal level, it was like, I know I'm not alone in saying, "You're no good, you're useless, you can't do anything," and being world weary here. I knew this was a condition that afflicted millions,
yeah.
probably billions of people. And I was like, "Can I facilitate some sort of change there?"
Right. Nice.
And and so I thought I'd move into HR, but I found it really hard. I mean, there's only so many times you can be told as a graduate, you need to go get some bloody experience. It's like, well, I'm applying for a graduate job.
Catch 22, ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah.
It's like, you're paying me peanuts. I'm coming here to get the experience.
Yeah.
Um,
This is
and I
where there's a
just,
lot to be said for apprenticeships, I think, isn't there?
well, I mean, in all honesty, and I've said this numerous times, I think if I had a do-over, I wouldn't have gone to university as a 19-year-old. I would have most definitely have taken the management training option at the hotel I was working at the time.
Right.
And I'd have probably ended up with a degree and I would have ended up in a hell of a lot less debt.
Mm.
But hey ho, I mean,
That
I
was your
wanted
path.
to, yeah, ultimately, I wanted to get out of home. I wanted to get out of my town,
Yeah.
and university provided that escape route.
Brilliant.
So at the time, it was the logical option for me. So, yeah, so I graduated and I was like, well, I can't get a job in HR and I've got no money, you know, you get a job somewhere. So I started applying for hospitality management stuff.
Right.
So I went back to what I was doing anyway. So again, so I ended up doing that for 3 years
Right.
and came back home, ended up somehow back in my hometown. And I was in a really good relationship at the time. And it was brilliant. You know, I'd actually opened myself to it and it was great. I loved it. And then went within probably about 6 months of being back here,
Right.
my energy and everything started going down because I said to the person at the time, I'm saving up. When we got together, I said, look, this is where I'm going. You know, I'm
Mhm.
saving up money to go on a trip. Is that something that appeals to you? Because I'm adamant, you know, I know there's going to be compromises and stuff, but I'm absolutely adamant that that's what's happening.
Right.
So if that's not going to be aligned with where you want to go, let's
Find
do
out
each
now.
other a favor right
Yeah.
now before we
Yeah.
get involved. And she said, yeah, 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 let's do it. Let's do it. And then it just became apparent as we started getting into the relationship, maybe that wasn't quite what she had in mind.
Right.
And I was in a job I didn't like, that didn't fulfill me. working long hours, slowly getting more and more and more depressed. There was stuff going on with the family,
Right.
and I was sinking.
Could you
And
feel it happening? Did you know that that's what was going on?
it
Did
was,
you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was dark. I was
Mhm.
like, yeah. I always liken it to kind of a Jack in a Box, really. So I was like literally getting pressed in, and I was getting
Mm.
deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and something had to give.
Wow.
And along the way, there were lots of meltdowns because, again, I didn't know how to really I still, at this age, I would have been in my mid to late 20s there. I didn't know how to articulate myself. I didn't know how to be. I had virtually zero emotional intelligence when it came to expressing how I felt,
Right.
my needs.
Yeah.
And because I was constantly told how selfish I was, because I would shut myself off.
Right.
Whereas now I know there's, when you look after your kind of emotional needs,
Mm.
the ripple effect of that is it's almost selfless. But that was the
You can't
narrative
see it.
around me.
Yeah, you can't know at the time because it's what you're consistently hearing. So that's who you believe that you are. And
Yeah,
you don't recognize that you have a say in your identity. It's not something given to you by other people based upon your behavior. But when you're young, you don't know that.
yeah,
And the whole thing that you're saying, and it's I mean, this is why it's such a beautiful story, because you didn't have the skills to articulate, and yet now your work is helping other people to be
yeah,
able to articulate their story and to be able to say what they need to do to on video.
yeah.
And this is something that you've had to learn for yourself, isn't it? And this is where, I just love the fact that you're giving back based upon what you went through and how you felt. I mean, you get it.
Yeah, I think because, again, you have to learn this yourself. There's no other way around that. I mean, you can get support around you. You can have teachers, mentors, coaches, counselors, whatever you need to help facilitate that. But ultimately, it's your journey,
Yeah.
and we all
And you have to be
experience the
willing,
world
don't you?
differently. There
You
has
were
to be a
willing.
willingness. There
Mhm.
has to be a willingness, I mean, for me, this last year, for example, I've decided to go down a rabbit hole. I went down the rabbit hole by choice
Right.
because I knew that there was some generational trauma and some other trauma there that just needed to be dealt with, because it kept on showing up time and time and time and time again. And
Right.
this is the thing, like, in answer to your masks, you can go and move, and I did go and move to a different country. You can go anywhere else in the world. You can go to university. You can go get drunk and be the life and soul of the party. Whatever way you are using to distract yourself,
Mhm.
eventually your story, your trauma, it will catch you back up.
And that
So
is so true. It's something that I think we need to help people to recognize that wherever you go, you're still taking you with you.
yeah,
Whether you're moving house, countries, as you said, and we put these masks on and pretend, and we need to ask the question: Who is this mask actually for?
yeah,
Is it for other people or is it for me? And oftentimes we don't know. And being
yeah,
able to explore that for yourself is quite something. And you mentioned when we were pre-chatting before we actually came on the podcast, you mentioned um, Buddhism and retreats and all that kind of stuff. And this
yeah,
is where, doing the deeper work and allowing yourself to go, as you said, by choice down the rabbit hole, because this stuff was coming back up. And, what we do know is what we resist persists. And if you're not taking action on it, it's going to show up somewhere else in another
yeah,
form until you darn well do. And this is, I think, if we can help people to recognize that it's not about you not being able to deal with it, it's the right time and the right place for you
yeah,
to do what you need to do. And I think for you to be able to say that you made that choice, knowing that you were probably opening a can of worms, was quite a big step with your history. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so what were your feelings about it going into it? Because you knew you had to do it, but also what else was going on for you?
Well, like I said, the things kept on showing up time and time again. The narratives about rejection, about not being good enough, about not being able to really get emotionally attached, to be vulnerable. And I was like, if I keep on just going down this path and doing it a little bit, like a little superficially at a time,
Mm,
it's just gonna keep showing up. There's it and it does. I
mm,
noticed how it had literally contaminated every aspect of my life, my business, my relationships, my self-worth, everything.
wow.
And the narrative of being not good enough was also something I was projecting outwards towards people.
Mm,
Like, I was saying that I was feeling judged by people, but I was also judging them by saying, "This is not good enough. This friendship group's not good enough. This partner's not good." I
mm,
wasn't actually articulating it in that way, but that's what now that I've actually got to sit and reflect upon it, I was like, "Oh, my life.
yeah.
All of this stuff that I was playing the victim over, I
Mm,
was doing to other people through either my actions or my beliefs."
mm,
So having that, I mean, that's a realization that's come up really in the last year, like to be able to articulate it in the way that I just did. But I just knew something had to stop.
right.
I stopped a cycle last year with a partner that I yeah, we'd been dancing some dance for a while. Um and I just valued her too much and valued myself too. It's like we're hurting each other. We're not doing each other any favors. So breaking that connection was a shock,
A
huge
challenge
shock,
too. Yeah, it's a challenge as well,
massive.
isn't it? Yeah.
And she said to me numerous times, because she could see it, she's very empathetic. And I was saying to a friend the other day, at some point, I will say to her, you know, you were right.
Right.
Um, and it was that moment, but it was that kind of trauma of breaking that. It was like, this has got to stop.
Mm. There's a
This
lot
has
of
got to
fear
stop.
attached to it, isn't it? There's a lot of fear.
Huge.
Yeah, and this is where you've got to be in a certain space and place with who you are
Yeah.
to know that you can handle it. And I think, whether people think it's woo woo, it doesn't really matter. We are energetic beings,
Yeah.
that's a fact. And we're living in a universe that is energy.
Yeah.
And everything around us is. And when we're talking about, you said that the vibe wasn't right for you in a certain town, you wanted the hell out. And this is where we get the same sort of vibes and feelings about people, but we forget that we're giving off the vibrations too. And
Huge.
people are picking up on it. And what we give out, we get back. And
Yep.
this is not the woo woo stuff. This is scientifically,
It's
based.
perfect. It's
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah,
energy, yeah.
we're all energy. And but when it comes to relationships, there are so many confusions, contradictions, and fears around what will the other person think, how do I say it. And then, as you say, when you add on to that the fact that maybe I'm not great at communicating what I really mean. I know in my head
Mm.
what I mean and what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, but can I actually orate that? And that's a skill, as you quite rightly said, you need to learn, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Because I think one of the things I often say is certainly in the work that I do, and it applies to all aspects of life, people aren't mind readers.
no,
You can, if you are trained and have skill in it, you kind of can be. If you're paying attention to body language, eye movements, if you do anything like neuro-linguistic programming, you
mm,
can sort of
sort of.
be
Yeah,
a mind reader. But again, you need to check in with that person. At
correct.
some point, you need to see what they are perceiving,
Yeah,
and that involves space, asking
it does.
questions,
Yeah,
listening,
yeah,
and even just the prospect of even just being present and listening is such a powerful way to communicate. And I think certainly for me, I always felt very threatened and very vulnerable in
Right.
those situations. And again, I know where that comes from now. And that, like you were just saying there, Vicky, like there was, I remember saying to a few people, I said to them, because I get so bloody frustrated. I was like, I wish you could see what was in my mind. And yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking it, I just don't. I it's like Brené Brown says, like that daring greatly. I That was just too high stakes for me. Even though really in that situation it's just two people or a group of people or what, the stakes really aren't that high. But if you come into it
Mm,
with trauma, if you come into it with a negative self-image, those stakes can be unbearable.
yeah. Yeah. And that's, something that I mean a lot of people just don't recognize at all. And the fact that you've got enough awareness to be able to recognize it is shows the amount of work that you've had to do, and self-reflection, and giving yourself that space, and then being able to go, yeah, this is going to be tough, but it needs to be done. And now is the time for me to do it, even though I've no idea how it's going to pan out.
Oh
I'm
yeah, yeah.
prepared to take that risk, because that's got to be better than staying, really, I suppose, living a lie, and pretending that the relationship is not what it actually is for both of you.
Yeah, and I think that's true in any aspect. You
Mm,
know, you are literally acting or living a lie. You're not being truthful to yourself,
yeah,
and you're acting in a way you're acting in a way how you want it to be. And
correct.
sometimes definitely that can be beneficial,
Yeah,
if it's coming from a healthy place.
correct. Yeah, it has its
If
place.
it's
There's no
coming
doubt.
from a healthy place, for sure. But I think if you are literally just pretending that everything is okay, I mean, that's the reason for every single breakdown that I've had in my life, culminating with the spectacular one I had in 2016, it which had a very, very big impact on my life. I was pretending.
And wearing masks, it's like acting. You are pretending to be somebody else. We're back to Wurzel Gummidge again. So they were kind of right, weren't they? You putting the different heads on and the different masks on and being a different person, because partly because it worked for you, and partly because it worked for the other person, until you realize it's too hard. It's not working anymore. It's too much effort and it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't. I mean, I think it's important to know the reason why people wear masks, and because I think there's often quite a negative connotation attached to it.
I agree.
And the reason for a lot of people, I'm not gonna put words in people's minds here, but I'm just gonna say my story now that I know what the purpose behind those masks were. It was protection. It was a defense mechanism.
Mm.
The irony behind that defense mechanism was it was a defense mechanism that had been put in place when I was a kid to stop me from getting hurt. And I was basically a child walking around in a 36-year-old man's body, effectively. And that caused so much friction. But the mask itself was a protection mechanism. I know for me, certainly like from the male side of things, with the narrative around males' mental health, there's so many really, really unhelpful narratives out there, like the whole "be a man" sort of
What does that
thing.
even mean?
Who It's like I always love kind of expressing to people how we both have masculine and feminine energies, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Well, no, I'm not gay." I'm like, "How has that got anything to do with your sexuality?"
But that's
You
just
know?
down to in education, poor
Absolutely.
interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I was aware at a very young age that I had a strong feminine energy and that I really thrived within that
Right.
feminine energy. And you know, there's those masks. You don't want to get found out. You've got to be strong. You've got to be this, and it's all a hangover from God knows when. I don't know whether this is an industrial
Centuries.
age thing, whether this goes back even longer.
Yeah.
It's certainly ingrained,
Mm.
and so there was this notion certainly that I had to have it all together, and then the fact that people would always look to me to be their rock.
Right. Right.
Because I see the good in people. That is something that is one of my strengths, and potentially sometimes one of my weaknesses. Well, one of my blind spots sometimes.
Mm.
Um, but I see good in people, and the fact that I don't like to see people suffering and hurting when, in my perception, there is no bloody need for it. I would help them out. So people would constantly be the rock. And then I was a teacher, so people would look up to me.
Yeah.
And, I know when I was in Japan, this is where I had my breakdown, um, which was the scariest breakdown I've had out of the
Right.
lot. I mean, this one, yeah, I thought it was potentially game over.
Wow.
Um,
So what age were you when this big one happened?
36,
Right. So
36.
you had the first one ever at 18, and then
Yeah.
36 you it was still happening, but this was a big one.
Yeah, this was a whole identity crisis, and literally I was literally this was the time where I really, really admitted that I needed support and help. Really just got on the phone and said, "I'm in bad, bad shape."
Right.
So I reached out to people, but yeah, I was literally struggling because I would be going into work and I'd be like, "Yeah." It was like clicking a switch. I would
Right.
walk
You were
into
a
my
different person.
classroom and I'd be like, "Yeah, woo, woo, woo." And
Mm.
people were looking up to me, and there was a lot of uncertainty. I was working with 19-year-olds, at 20-year-olds at the time,
Right.
and they were quite angsty and uncertain about their place in the world. So I was helping them.
Mm.
And but the moment I got home, I was just
Spent.
I mean, I was physically shaking all the time.
Wow.
Like, I literally felt like the world was moving, and that and the whole time as well, I was traveling this new country, so I was going and I was like going to these amazing places. And I was like, I should be happy, but I'm dead.
Right.
I'm dead
And this is
inside.
where you realize that physically your body can only handle so much. That
Yeah.
trying to be on it and full of it all of the time, and you've got, you're running on cortisol and adrenaline, and at some point your body just has to go enough. When
Yeah,
you
when it
add
did.
in this right, and when you add in the excitement of exploring and the pressure to show up as this person, there comes a point where everything just goes, I can't do it anymore.
Oh, and
Just,
it did.
yeah, and it did.
It did. I know I've been quite open about this. Like, I certainly I've raised I'm a big advocate for males' mental health, and I definitely and I've every November I'm involved with November charity, and looking at getting involved with others as well.
Do you want to just quickly
So
let people know what that is, in case they don't know?
yes, yeah. So November, everybody just thinks it's like people wear silly mustaches in November, which they do. It's
Bit more
true.
than that.
It's kind of part of their marketing, but ultimately, this is an amazing charity that was set up for 3 reasons, really: to raise awareness for the 3 number 1 killers, well, the 3 top killers
Yeah,
of men in the world: testicular cancer, prostate cancer, and the number 1, suicide.
yeah, yeah.
And
Frightening.
it's scary. It's
Mm.
scary, the rates. And as somebody, I wouldn't say, when I was saying kind of game over earlier on, I called for an intervention
Right.
because the voices were just got
Too much.
loud,
Right.
and they were upsetting, and I was just begging for sleep. I was like, I can honestly say, I don't think I wasn't ready to go. So I
Right.
don't think, but I was like, I need someone to come and hold my hand and make sure
Just in
just
case.
in case. So, but that was the start of this journey, and it's
And that
been
is, you know, the very fact that you had the awareness to be able to reach out for help is such an important thing to do, and to know, where do you even go? Who do you pick up the phone to? And I think we've got such a big challenge ahead of us for those of us who understand that there is so many people who are suffering, and
huge.
particularly I think in today's society, where the pressures are seemingly so much more from all areas, and we're having to grow up so much faster. The pace of life is faster. We're exposed to so many more things, so many more shoulds, must, ought tos,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we just, for particularly for men, to be able to say, hey, I am struggling, is something that you have been taught, just a socially conditioned narrative that is still as powerful now as I think it ever was.
Yep.
That you don't say that, you man up. And these sayings are just, they just roll off the tongue because we're so used to hearing them and saying them. But we don't even know what that actually means, really. What does it mean to man up? And as you said, people need to know, we're all energy, both masculine and feminine, all of us. And
Yep.
we need to feel that it's okay to express any energy that we want to, and not put the lid on it, or as you said, put the jack in a box in the box, because
Yeah.
at some point it's going to spring out,
Oh, and
and
it
we don't
will.
know how it's going to look for each person. But for the work that you now do,
Yep.
you are helping people to actually increase their self-awareness,
Yeah.
recognize that they have got a story that people want to listen to, and to help them to really, I suppose, get more confident being the person that they truly are and always were.
Yeah. And I
Just take
think
them
that
back. Tell people more
absolutely.
about what you actually do, and where people can find out more of and watch more of your excellent work.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, it's all about removing those shoulds. It's all about taking control of your narrative, and that's what I help my clients do using the medium of video. The video is the end result. The work that goes into creating that video is where you're going to find the biggest amount of growth.
Right. Right.
Addressing the reasons why you're not showing up, why you feel you should, excuse me, why you feel you should have to follow somebody else's rules, fit
Right.
into somebody else's boxes. What are the reasons why you think your message doesn't matter? Addressing that, dealing with that at its root, getting past it, getting clear on your story, because you do have a story to tell.
Yeah.
You absolutely do have a story to tell, and it will resonate with people. So honoring that, and then sending it out with energy, because again, like you mentioned earlier on, if you are not believing in your words, if you are fearful of the words you're saying, if you're not confident in your delivery of that, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to attract the people you want.
Mm.
And it's only going to feed those negative stories. Well, I knew nobody would watch my video
Right.
anyway.
Self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Absolutely, which it is.
Yeah.
So I work with that. There is an element of strategy in there as well,
Mm.
so that you're focusing your messages in a way that gets people to feel like you are talking directly to them.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And so, yeah, so I live on LinkedIn. So
Right. Love it. Love it. So
so you can
find
find me
Ashley
there.
Griffiths on LinkedIn. We'll put the links anyway in the show notes and in the description. But also, where can people kind of see what you actually do? Where do you put your videos? Are they all on LinkedIn? Are they on
Yeah,
YouTube?
so I've got videos on LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube at the moment.
Right. So go find Ashley, folks, on all of those social media platforms. See what he does and get in touch with him. Ashley, it has been a delight. We could no doubt keep talking for another couple of hours because I think we've only just scratched the surface of
Oh,
your
absolutely.
story. I would love to have you again as a guest just to explore a little bit deeper into some of the stuff that we've just kind of touched on. But I just want to say thank you for being so open, so honest about your story, and thank you for championing men's mental health, because we need to talk about it more. Is there anything that you would like to just kind of leave our listeners with, just as a last sentence or two?
Yeah, I'm going to just reflect on the mental health side of things here. Know that you're not alone, because that is often a lie that we say to ourselves. I'm alone. I'm the only one that feels this way. No one will get it. There's something wrong with me. You're just having a bad time right now, and there is support out there for you. Maybe you don't feel comfortable talking to your family, friends. Go reach out to the Samaritans. They're there. They'll listen. Maybe you've got a colleague at work that will listen. There's help and support out there. So much more now. Just be open to finding your path with that, because it is unique. It is unique. What's worked for me, the more spiritual, holistic side of things, might not be the journey for you. Maybe it is medication, counseling, whatever. Explore it and believe that you can, you can find your path.
Yeah. So over and above everything else, don't keep it to yourself.
No.
Talk about it. Brilliant. Ashley, thank you once again. And for those of you who are listening, don't forget, if you have found anything that we have discussed in this podcast helpful, either for yourself or for somebody else that you know might get something from it, please do share it with them. Please do give us a like. Please do subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And please do send in some comments and let us know what you think about our discussion. And if you want to get in touch with Ashley, you will be able to do that on his social media, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, and on YouTube. But also I'll be putting links that you can just click magically on here. Thank you for listening, folks. Whatever you do, remember, you are worth it. You do deserve it. You have one body, as far as we know. Take care of it, because it's taking care of you. Thank you. Bye now.